Okay, and our last speaker is Stefan Voigt, who's a professor at the University of Hamburg and the director of its Institute of Law and Economics, and a co-principal investigator in the Minerva Center for the Rule of Law under extreme conditions. And in that capacity, I've had the privilege to work together with him over the last 11 years. Stefan will bring some empirical insights about second-generation immigrants and nonviolent resistance, and is joining us over Zoom.
Okay, so thanks for the introduction, Deborah. I would have liked to be in Israel at this time, but we are going on vacation actually today. The car is packed, and we are just waiting to get out of the session, and then I'll be on my way to France. But before, let me talk a little bit about a specific aspect of civil disobedience. So actually, it's not only in Israel that constitutional democracy is under pressure. There are many places in the world. I'm giving you a list here. You're all familiar with it, so I don't need to spell it out explicitly. Actually, the question is then, what means are available to ensure that government will comply with the Constitution if constitutional democracy is under threat? And actually, systematically, we can think of three actors: constitutional veto players, the opposition, the judiciary, that was already talked about in a previous presentation. Secondly, you can think of foreign powers that might put some pressure on a government that tries to get away from sort of a constitutional democracy way. Think of the European Union putting pressure on Poland and/or Hungary. And lastly, the people. And this is basically where civil disobedience would potentially come in. Okay, let me just skip this. Just a couple of questions that emerge with regard to civil disobedience. Given that government does not comply with the Constitution, under what conditions will civil disobedience emerge? When are we likely to see it? Given that government does not comply with the Constitution and civil disobedience does emerge, under what conditions will it be effective? And under what conditions does government expect civil disobedience to emerge and therefore refrains from reneging on the Constitution in the first place? So these are all interesting and important questions. Unfortunately, as also highlighted by a previous speaker, these are very difficult to answer right now. So I will focus on a very specific aspect of these that will hopefully help to get closer to answers regarding the other questions. So actually, what I will be talking about today is the question whether it is possible to show that there is different civil disobedience cultures. Okay, so that different societies have a different propensity to develop civil disobedience under different conditions. That might sound a bit strange as a question, but we believe that it is quite an important question because it could help to understand better why democracy emerges in some places and not in others. It could also help to understand why democracy is more sustainable in some places than in others. So this is basically the question that I'm after. Hannah Arendt hasn't really been in the focus today. There have been Thoreau and Gandhi and others. Martin Luther King has been mentioned. I'm proposing to follow the description regarding civil disobedience that was offered by Hannah Arendt. And she defines it as, or she says, civil disobedience arises when a significant number of citizens have become convinced either that the normal channels of change no longer function and grievances will not be heard or acted upon, or that, on the contrary, the government is about to change and has embarked upon and persists in modes of action whose legality and constitutionality are open to grave doubt. She later adds that nonviolence would be a generally accepted necessary characteristic of civil disobedience. And later in the book, she adds, alluding to Tocqueville, that in a sense, civil disobedience can be considered as a form of voluntary association. So basically, she refers to the social capital literature that can be traced back to Tocqueville. Now, when economists, and I'm an economist, talk about culture, we think about beliefs and values that are transmitted fairly unchanged from generation to generation. So if we want to talk about civil disobedience culture, we somehow need to mingle these two terms, and it could be reading something like this. Extra parliamentary political action aimed at inducing constitution-complying behavior by government, which is triggered by customary beliefs and values that are transmitted fairly unchanged from generation to generation. So this is the proposed definition of civil disobedience culture. Okay. Now we know that civil disobedience basically means many people coordinate their behavior in order to reach some public good, some common good. We also know that this is rather unlikely. Okay, people would like to get the goal, but they might be even better off if others basically provide that good, and they can basically stay at home. Okay, but then again, we observe mass movements, as in Israel, for the last couple of months, and the question is, can we explain differences between countries? And again, the question is, are there specific protest cultures that can be identified and that are different between countries? And here's the question, sort of in a more schematic way. So imagine you have some sort of event. A government wants to make the judiciary more dependent on the executive, and then there is environmental factors and cultural factors. Okay, so the event might be very different across countries, but also the environmental factors, the degree of media freedom, the degree to which social media can be used, cannot be used. So in other words, and there might be cultural factors. And the problem is that if environmental and cultural factors are different in different countries, it'll be very difficult to disentangle what effects are due to on civil disobedience are due to environmental factors, and what part is due to cultural factors. Okay, so that is a bit the empirical challenge: how to disentangle these two things. And actually, what we propose to do is to look at people who all live in the same country, that are basically subject to the same environmental factors, the same laws, the same government action, the same media freedom, etc., but have different backgrounds, that is, are second-generation immigrants. So the cultural factors are not identical, whereas they are all subject to the same event. They are all basically living in the same environment, but they basically bring to the table different cultural heritages. Why do they bring to the table different cultural heritages? Well, we only look at second-generation immigrants. Okay, so in other words, we look at people whose parents or father, mother have been born and raised in a different country. Okay, and the question is whether we can show that this cultural heritage has an effect on the propensity of these second-generation immigrants to become civilly disobedient. Okay, so that is, in economics, this is referred to as the epidemiological approach, and was popularized by Raquel Fernandez in 10-15 years ago. Okay, so what we now need is the measure for civil disobedience, both in the origin country as well as in the determination, the living country. Okay, and what we do is we basically rely on the World Values Survey, which contains a number of questions, such as, have you signed a petition? Have you joined in boycotts? Have you been attending lawful/peaceful demonstrations? Have you joined unofficial strikes? Have you been occupying buildings or factories? So we basically use this for the country of origin as the average answers that have been given, that were given by 1,000 respondents more or less from each of these countries. Okay, and then basically what we want to do is we want to show whether in a sense, the civil disobedience culture from the origin country can explain the likelihood that a particular individual today is more or less likely to participate in civil disobedience activities. Okay, and now would be unlikely if a single variable could explain all of the variation in civil disobedience across individuals. So we look at a couple of other things in addition. We look at the degree of civil society, the membership in voluntary associations in the country of origin. We look at civil liberties in the country of origin, and we look at the way in which children are basically being raised and educated. Are they taught independence, responsibility, obedience? And in addition, we basically look at two individual factors, namely the age of a person and the gender of a person. This looks complicated. In essence, it's very it's very simple. So let me just move directly to the results. So the dependent variable here is the likelihood that a person, say in the US, will become civilly disobedient. And what we look at basically is whether the father or the mother of that person has come, say, from Cuba or Venezuela or Israel. And we basically use the mean answers from Cuba, Venezuela, or Israel to see whether they can predict the likelihood of that particular person becoming civilly disobedient. Okay, so the civil disobedience here basically is the mean of a country of origin, whereas the dependent variable is the individual propensity to become civilly disobedient. And what you can see here basically is that this is the 1% level, that the mean of the origin country is a very precise predictor of the likelihood that a person will become civilly disobedient. Okay, so that's the main point here. We have two other variables in here, namely gender, which shows that, other things being equal, women are significantly less likely to become civilly disobedient. We also look at age. So in other words, we are interested in the question at what age people are maximally likely to become civilly disobedient. This is why we don't only have age. So this is positive. You would think the older you get, the more likely you are to become civilly disobedient. We also look at H square, which basically gives us an inverted U shape, and we can calculate the maximum. So the maximum likelihood of becoming civilly disobedient is at age 38. Now you might say, well, this is just 3 variables. How robust are your results? This is why we have all these other controls. They're all from the country of origin. Okay, so civil society membership, civil liberties, how kids are being raised. As you can see, none of them is really robustly significant. You don't see any asterisks here. The only thing which is basically worth noting is the answer to the question whether it can ever be justified to fight the police. Okay, so this refers to the origin country. And as you can see, the more people say it can be justified to fight the police, that is, to do something violent, the less likely an individual today is to become civilly disobedient. So I'm flagging this because it in a sense shows that violent versus non-violent protests are not complements, but seem to be substitutes. This is at least, one way how you can interpret this this finding. Let me alert you to one last thing that we looked at in social psychology. This distinction between tight versus loose societies is somewhat prominent. What does it mean? Basically, it means that there are some societies that have very stringent social norms. And in case somebody doesn't comply with these norms, their punishment, sanctioning will be pretty harsh. And on the other hand, there are so-called loose societies, that is, societies with rather loose social norms, very liberal societies. And in case you don't comply with them, well, then sanctioning is also not very strict. And we were interested in the question whether there is sort of a systematic correlation between tightness versus looseness and the likelihood of becoming civilly disobedient. And this is actually an interaction effect that you see And as you can see in the horizontal line here, the tighter a society is, the more likely, this is the upward sloping curve in the middle, the more likely it is that people will be civilly disobedient. Okay, and in a sense, these dashed lines are the 95% confidence intervals. So any level larger than 0 basically shows there is a significant increase in the coefficient regarding the likelihood to become civilly disobedient. Okay, so let me just wrap up. Is there a culture of civil disobedience? Our results seem to say yes, there is. The propensity to participate in extra-parliamentary political action is driven by the propensity to do so in parents' country of origin, and the effect of civil disobedience occurs largely independent of social capital. Maybe I was a bit quick there. So here we have civil society membership. There are some asterisks here, but our main question was whether civil society membership basically would have an effect on the size of the coefficient regarding civil disobedience, and it does not. Okay, so that's why we interpret the findings like that. Just 2 follow-up questions. First, does the threat of civil disobedience really make governments comply with the Constitution? And it's very difficult to answer. Deborah basically alluded to some of the literature, but our knowledge is clearly unsatisfactory. The second question would then be, if there is a culture of civil disobedience, how to explain it? I mean, why do some countries seem to be very strong in providing civil disobedience, whereas others are not? So in other words, the question would be, what are the factors determining the specific protest culture of a country? What role for geographic and climatic factors? What role for family types? What role for historical experience? And whatever other potential factors you might be thinking of. And this is it. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much. Have a great vacation. I want to thank you all 4 of you, for really fascinating talks. I've unfortunately been told that we don't have time for questions, which is very disappointing because I actually have questions for each of you. But really, thank you so much.